The sea was angry that night. Waves crashed like titanic fists against the hull of the Black Serpent, sending cold sprays of salt water over the deck. The sky above was a bruised shade of black, torn apart by jagged streaks of lightning. Thunder rumbled in the distance like the growl of some unseen beast. Captain Jacob Red Jack Mercer stood at the wheel, his gloved hands gripping the worn wood as the ship fought against the storm's wrath. His crimson coat billowed behind him, soaked from the rain, but he barely noticed. His sharp green eyes scanned the horizon, searching. His crew, hardened men who had seen their fair share of storms, moved like specters through the chaos, securing the sails, tightening the ropes, and muttering curses to whatever gods might be listening. But Red Jack knew the truth. This storm was no coincidence. Something was coming. Then, through the sheets of rain, a shadow emerged in the water. A ship, or what was left of one. The wreck drifted like a corpse on the sea, its mast broken, its hull punctured with jagged wounds. The name on its side had been mostly worn away by time and tide, but Red Jack could just make out the last letters. Enchantress. He knew that name. The Enchantress had set sail months ago, on a whispered mission to chase down a legend. A legend called Captain Grimjaw. Captain! A voice rang out from the crow's nest. There's someone on that wreck. Red Jack's gaze sharpened. His instincts screamed at him. This was fate or damnation. Lower the boats, he ordered. The small rowboat creaked as it bobbed toward the wreckage. Red Jack and his first mate, Dorian Briggs, guided it through the water. The storm had begun to lessen, but the air still felt heavy, thick with something unnatural. As they neared, they saw him, a man clinging to life, sprawled across the shattered remains of the Enchantress. His clothes were tattered, his face pale and hollow, his lips cracked from salt and suffering. His right hand clutched something wrapped in oilskin, as if his very soul depended on keeping it safe. Red Jack leaped onto the wreck and knelt beside the man. Easy now. Who are you? The man's eyes flickered open, bloodshot and haunted. His voice was barely a whisper, carried by the wind. They're coming, he rasped. He's coming. A shiver ran through Red Jack's spine. Who? The one who guards it, the man gasped. The last map of Grimjaw. It's real. Red Jack's breath caught in his throat. Where? He demanded. The man coughed, something dark and wet dribbling from his lips. He shoved the oilskin bundle into Red Jack's hands. Find the others, before he does. Then, with a final, shuddering breath, the man went still. A moment later, a low groan came from the wreck's depths. Not from the ship itself, from something else. Something watching them. Red Jack and Briggs exchanged a look. Time to leave. Back aboard the Black Serpent, the crew gathered around as Red Jack unwrapped the oilskin bundle. Inside was a weathered scrap of parchment, its edges burnt as if someone had tried to destroy it. Briggs peered over his shoulder. It's only a piece. Indeed, the map was incomplete. A quarter of it was here, but the rest? Find the others before he does, Red Jack murmured, recalling the dying man's warning. Who was he? And why did it feel like something unnatural was at play? Just then, a loud crash erupted from the lower decks. A scream followed. The crew rushed below, lanterns swinging wildly. The cargo hold was in disarray, barrels overturned, supplies scattered, but the true horror lay in the center of the room. One of their own, dead. His eyes were wide, his mouth frozen in a scream. But there were no wounds, no sign of struggle. And yet, something had taken him. Briggs ran a hand through his hair. What in the devil's name? Red Jack crouched beside the body. He had seen fear before, but never like this. It was as if the man had stared into something that should not be seen. A chilling thought settled in his mind. The wreck. The map. The warning. This wasn't just a hunt for treasure anymore. They weren't the only ones looking. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving behind only silence and unease. The dead crewman was buried at sea, but his empty, lifeless gaze remained burned into their memories. Red Jack unfurled the fragment of Grimjaw's map once more. It was clear now, the treasure was real. But someone or something was hunting down those who sought it. "Briggs," Red Jack said at last, "we find the rest of this map." Briggs exhaled. "And if we find whatever's been killing people along the way?" Red Jack gave a grim smile. "Then we kill it first." The wind filled the sails, and the Black Serpent set forth. Towards treasure. Towards danger. Towards the legend of Captain Grimjaw. The morning sun painted the ocean in hues of gold and fire, but there was no warmth on the Black Serpent. The crew moved in uneasy silence, their minds still haunted by the previous night, the wreck, the dying man's warning, and the inexplicable death below deck. Red Jack Mercer stood at the ship's stern, his fingers tracing the burnt edges of the map fragment. The parchment was old, its ink faded in places, but what remained was enough to tell him one thing. The location it pointed to was deep within the Devil's Veil, a treacherous stretch of sea that few had entered and even fewer had returned from. Briggs approached, his expression grim. "The men are rattled." "They should be," Red Jack replied without looking up. "It's bad luck, Jack. A man dying in his sleep with no wounds. And the map," Briggs hesitated. "That wreck, we should have left it to rot." Red Jack finally turned to his first mate. "And let someone else take Grimjaw's treasure?" He shook his head. "No, Briggs. We finish this." Briggs sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then we'll need more than just this scrap." He pointed to the torn edges of the map. "We're looking for the missing pieces, right? That means others had them." Red Jack nodded. "And I know exactly where to start." Briggs raised a brow. "Don't tell me we're heading to Dead Man's Cay." A smirk tugged at the corner of Red Jack's mouth. "Then I won't tell you." Briggs groaned. Dead Man's Cay. A name whispered with equal parts fear and awe among seafarers. It was a haven for the damned, pirates who had run out of luck, mercenaries with nowhere left to go, and ghosts of men who should have died long ago. If anyone had another piece of Grimjaw's map, it would be found there. The wind was with them, and by nightfall, Dead Man's Cay emerged from the darkness like a jagged tooth rising from the ocean's maw. The island was a lawless place, its shores dotted with wrecked ships and its harbors teeming with the worst of humanity. Fires burned in makeshift camps, laughter and drunken shouts rang through the air, and the scent of spilled rum and blood mingled with the salty breeze. As the Black Serpent dropped anchor, Red Jack turned to his crew. "We go in, we find the map piece, and we leave. Keep your weapons close, and your tempers closer." Briggs adjusted the pistol at his belt. "Who exactly are we looking for?" Red Jack's eyes darkened. "A man named Vance Holloway." Briggs cursed. "The vulture." Red Jack only nodded. Vance Holloway, once a pirate captain, now little more than a scavenger, preying on the misfortunes of others. He was known for one thing: looting the dead. If anyone had taken a piece of Grimjaw's map from a dying man's hands, it would be him. The streets of Dead Man's Cay were thick with danger. Cutthroats eyed them as they passed, gamblers shouted over rigged dice, and women with knowing smiles whispered promises of pleasure and betrayal. Briggs kept a hand on his blade. "If this is where we die, just know I told you this was a bad idea." Red Jack grinned. "If this is where we die, I'll let you say, 'I told you so' in hell." They found Holloway in a dimly lit tavern known as the Gallows Rest, a place where secrets were traded over poisoned drinks. Holloway sat in a booth near the back, his thin fingers adorned with stolen rings, his eyes sunken but sharp. He smiled as they approached, revealing gold teeth. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice like rust scraping metal. "Captain Mercer. What an unpleasant surprise." Red Jack slid into the seat across from him. "Vance, I hear you've been collecting souvenirs again." Holloway's smile widened. "Oh, I collect many things. Which particular treasure are you after?" Red Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice. "A piece of Grimjaw's map." Holloway's expression faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Briggs caught it too. His hand tensed near his pistol. "I don't know what you're talking about," Holloway said smoothly. Red Jack smirked. "You always were a terrible liar, Vance." He placed a small pouch of gold on the table. "That's just for the conversation. Tell me where the map is, and I'll make it worth your while." Holloway's fingers twitched, itching to take the gold. But then, something changed. His gaze flickered past them, to the tavern door. His face went pale. Red Jack turned just as the door swung open. A man stepped inside. Or rather, something that used to be a man. He was tall, unnaturally so, his frame wrapped in a long, tattered coat. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes, cold, unblinking black pits, locked onto Red Jack with an unnatural hunger. The tavern fell silent. Men who had faced the gallows, who had fought wars, went still. Holloway whispered one word, barely audible. "The Revenant." The thing in the doorway moved, its steps slow and deliberate. The lantern light flickered, as if struggling to stay alive in its presence. Red Jack knew, this was what the dying man had warned about. This was the thing hunting the map. And now, it had found them. "Jack," Briggs muttered, hand on his pistol. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," Red Jack said, standing slowly. "But I don't plan on asking." The Revenant took another step forward, and the entire tavern seemed to shudder. Then, it moved. Lightning fast. The first man to draw steel was dead before he could scream, his throat slashed open by unseen hands. Another pirate fired a pistol, only for the bullet to pass through the Revenant as if it were mist. The tavern erupted into chaos. Briggs grabbed Holloway by the collar. "Where's the map?" Holloway, shaking, pointed toward the back exit. "My quarters. Upstairs, go." Red Jack and Briggs bolted, dragging Holloway with them. Behind them, the Revenant followed. The upstairs chamber was cluttered with stolen trinkets, blood-stained charts, and a single tattered map piece pinned to the wall. Briggs grabbed it, stuffing it into his coat. "Got it." Below, the sounds of screaming grew louder. Holloway whimpered. "It's coming, it's coming." Red Jack slammed the door shut just as the Revenant reached the top of the stairs. For a moment, there was silence. Then, bang. The door buckled as something massive slammed against it. "Out the window!" Red Jack shouted. Briggs smashed the glass. Cold sea air rushed in as they climbed onto the ledge. Below them, the streets of Dead Man's Cay were a battlefield. Pirates running, screaming, as shadows twisted and unnatural figures emerged from the darkness. It wasn't just one. There were more of them. "Jump!" Red Jack commanded. One by one, they leaped. As they hit the ground, Red Jack caught a final glimpse of the upper floor, just as the Revenant smashed through the door. It stepped into the room, and turned its head toward them. Even from a distance, Red Jack felt its gaze. This wasn't over. Not even close. As they ran for the Black Serpent, Red Jack knew one thing. Whatever guarded Grimjaw's map wasn't human, and it was hunting them. The night swallowed the Black Serpent as it cut through the dark waters, leaving behind the cursed shores of Dead Man's Cay. But even as the island disappeared into the horizon, the horrors they had witnessed refused to fade. Red Jack Mercer stood at the helm, his hands tightening around the wheel. The wind whipped at his coat, carrying whispers he wished he could ignore. Briggs leaned against the railing beside him, breathing heavily. "Tell me again what in the depths of hell that thing was." "I don't know," Red Jack admitted. "But it wasn't human." Briggs exhaled sharply. "And now it's after us." Below deck, Vance Holloway sat against the wall, rubbing his bruised throat. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd dragged him aboard, but his silence wouldn't last forever. Red Jack descended the stairs and crouched in front of him. "Start talking." Holloway looked up, his gold teeth glinting in the lantern light. "It won't stop, you know." Red Jack narrowed his eyes. "What won't?" "The Revenant." Holloway's voice was hoarse, like the words themselves drained him. "You think it's after the map, but it's not. It's after anyone who seeks it." Briggs crossed his arms. "That thing, it wasn't alone. There were more of them." "Are you saying they're all after us?" Holloway nodded. "They don't need the map itself. They follow the ones who chase Grimjaw's treasure." Red Jack exchanged a glance with Briggs. "That means," Briggs said slowly, "even if we throw this damn thing overboard, they'll still come for us." Holloway gave a hollow laugh. You're marked." Red Jack clenched his jaw. He pulled the stolen map fragment from his coat and unrolled it against the wooden table. The faded ink revealed part of an island's outline, jagged like broken teeth. "This is our next stop." He jabbed a finger at the map. "If we have any hope of figuring out what we're dealing with, it's here." Briggs squinted at the map. "Where is that?" Holloway hesitated. Then he whispered, "The Isle of Bones." A heavy silence filled the room. Briggs swore. "Jack, no. That place is a graveyard." "That place," Holloway said, "was Grimjaw's last known hideout." Red Jack's expression didn't waver. "Then that's where we go." Briggs exhaled sharply. "You're going to get us all killed." Red Jack smirked. "Then I hope you've made peace with the afterlife." For 2 days, the ship sailed through treacherous waters. The crew grew uneasy. Superstitious murmurs spread below deck, men whispered about shadows in the waves, and at night, a distant tolling bell could be heard through the mist. Holloway refused to sleep. "It's coming," he would mumble. "They're watching." On the 3rd day, the fog lifted just enough to reveal the Isle of Bones. It wasn't large, but it was unmistakable. Dark cliffs rising like jagged fangs, skeletal trees clawing at the sky, and a beach littered with the remains of shipwrecks long forgotten. The place reeked of death. As the Black Serpent dropped anchor, no one spoke. Briggs swallowed hard. "Jack, I got a bad feeling about this." Red Jack stepped forward, fastening his pistol. "That makes 2 of us." They rowed ashore in silence. The water was unnaturally still, the oars barely making a ripple. The sand crunched underfoot as they stepped onto the cursed island. Holloway hugged himself, his eyes darting to the shadows. "Grimjaw came here for a reason," Red Jack murmured, scanning the coastline. "There must be something." A distant clanging echoed through the air. The crew froze. Holloway's face drained of color. "The bell," he whispered. Briggs's fingers tensed around his pistol. "Where's it coming from?" Red Jack turned toward the cliffs. "Up there." Against all better judgment, they climbed. The rocks were slick, as if wet with unseen blood. Strange markings were carved into the stone, symbols none of them could read, but all could feel. At the top, they found a ruined chapel. The wooden doors were cracked, barely holding on to their hinges. A rusted bell tower loomed above, swaying in the windless air. Holloway shook his head violently. "No. No, no, no. We leave. Now." Red Jack ignored him. He stepped forward and pushed open the doors. Inside, the shadows moved. At first, it looked like the pews were covered in figures, all seated and silent. Then Briggs lifted his lantern, and the truth revealed itself. They weren't people. They were corpses. Dried husks, mummified by time, dozens of them, seated as if still waiting for a sermon. Briggs swore under his breath. "What in the devil's name is this?" Red Jack stepped forward, his boots echoing through the dead-silent chapel. At the front, where a priest should have stood, a skeleton sat instead. Clutched in its bony fingers was another piece of the map. Red Jack reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the parchment, the bell above rang. Boom! The entire chapel shook. The corpses in the pews shifted. Holloway screamed. And then, the dead stood. They weren't human anymore. The husks lurched to life, their empty eye sockets burning with an unnatural glow. Their mouths stretched open in silent screams. The first one moved faster than it should have, grabbing Briggs by the wrist. He fired point-blank. The bullet tore through its skull, but it didn't stop. "Run!" Red Jack bellowed. They tore through the chapel, bursting through the doors just as the dead crawled after them. Red Jack clutched the new map fragment as they sprinted down the cliffs. Briggs fired wildly behind them. "Get to the boats! Get to the boats!" They hit the shore just as the Revenant emerged from the tree-line. It had followed them. Briggs turned. his gun shaking in his hands. "Jack!" Red Jack grabbed him and shoved him into the boat. "Row!" The creatures swarmed the beach. The boat hit the water just as skeletal hands clawed at the edges. Red Jack swung his cutlass, severing fingers, sending blackened bones splashing into the sea. Briggs grabbed an oar, shoving away a lunging corpse. Holloway sobbed as he rowed. Only when they reached the Black Serpent did they dare look back. On the shore, the Revenant watched them. It didn't move. It didn't follow. But even across the distance, Red Jack could feel it whispering to him. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The deck of the Black Serpent was eerily silent as the crew watched the Revenant and its legion of undead figures standing motionless on the cursed shores of the Isle of Bones. No one dared speak. No one even breathed too loudly. Red Jack's grip tightened around the newly acquired map fragment. It was damp with sweat despite the chilling wind howling over the dark sea. Briggs slumped against the mast, panting. "Tell me again why we're not turning around and burning that damn island to the ground." Holloway sat curled in the corner, his knuckles white as he clutched his knees. He hadn't spoken since they got back aboard, his eyes darting around as if seeing things no one else could. Red Jack exhaled and unrolled the 2 pieces of Grimjaw's legendary map side by side. The puzzle was starting to take shape. Briggs, regaining his composure, walked over and studied the map. 2 pieces down. How many more to go? 3, Jack muttered. Briggs groaned. Wonderful. And let me guess, each one is in a place worse than the last. Jack gave a humorless chuckle. Probably. A cold wind swept over the deck, carrying something with it, a faint, ghostly whisper. Jack stiffened. He turned, half expecting to see the Revenant standing right behind him. Nothing. But the whispering, it was growing louder. And then, a thunderous crack split the sky. Lightning slashed across the heavens, illuminating the towering silhouette of a ship. A ship that hadn't been there a moment before. A ship with no sails, no crew, and no soul. The crew of the Black Serpent froze as the phantom vessel materialized on the waves beside them. Briggs paled. "That's impossible." Holloway finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not a ship." Jack's heart pounded as he realized the truth. This was no ordinary vessel. This was the Revenant's ship, and it had come for them. The phantom ship didn't move. It simply drifted alongside the Black Serpent, its tattered sails billowing despite the lack of wind. The hull was rotted, yet it floated effortlessly on the water. No sound came from it, no creaking wood, no footsteps. Only the whispers. Jack clenched his fists. "We're leaving. Now." Briggs didn't argue. He spun toward the crew. "Raise the anchor. Unfurl the sails. Move, damn you." The crew, already on the edge of hysteria, sprang into action. Ropes snapped, the mast groaned, and the sails caught the wind as the Black Serpent lurched forward, cutting through the waves in a desperate bid to escape. But the phantom ship followed. It didn't sail. It simply glided. Briggs swore under his breath. "We can't outrun it, Jack." Jack's eyes stayed locked on the spectral ship. "We're not trying to outrun it." Briggs gave him a look. "Then what the hell are we doing?" Jack pulled out the map fragments. "We're heading to the next piece." Briggs stared at him. "Are you mad? That thing is following us, and you want to go treasure hunting." Jack turned to face him. "You think stopping will help? You think turning around and fighting will do anything?" His voice was sharp, a blade slicing through the crew's fear. "This ship, that creature, they aren't after us. They're after what we seek." Briggs exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Where's the next piece?" Jack pointed at the map. "Here." Briggs squinted at the name written in faded ink. "The sunken city of Varina." Briggs blinked. "You want us to dive into a cursed city buried under the sea?" Jack smirked. "Aye." Briggs let out a dry laugh. "Of course you do." The journey to the sunken city was brutal. The sea grew restless, waves thrashing against the ship as if warning them to turn back. The phantom ship remained on the horizon, never getting closer, but never falling behind. The crew barely spoke. Superstition weighed heavy on them, and Holloway had grown worse. He refused to sleep, muttering under his breath, clutching a small charm against his chest. His eyes had changed. They were darker, sunken, almost hollow. Jack tried to shake it off. He had bigger concerns. On the 5th day, they reached the coordinates. The sea was unnaturally still. No wind. No waves. Just silence. Briggs looked over the side. "This is it." Jack nodded. "The map says the next piece is below." Briggs sighed. "How deep?" Jack hesitated. "Very." Briggs gave him a deadpan look. "Fantastic." The crew prepared for the dive. They secured ropes and weighted belts, ensuring they could go deep enough to reach the ruins of Varna. Briggs checked his pistol. "Not that this will help underwater, but I feel naked without it." Jack strapped a knife to his belt. "Just try not to drown." Briggs smirked. "I'll do my best." Then, without another word, they dived. The water swallowed them whole. The depths of the ocean were hauntingly beautiful. They descended past jagged coral formations, their lanterns illuminating glimpses of ancient ruins. Then they saw it. The sunken city. It stretched far beyond what they could see, massive stone structures covered in seaweed and barnacles. Statues of forgotten gods loomed over them, their eyes hollow. Briggs gestured toward the center of the ruins, where a massive temple stood, half buried in the sand. Jack nodded. That was their destination. They swam forward, careful of their surroundings. Schools of fish darted past, but something felt wrong. The water grew darker. The temple loomed ahead, its entrance like the gaping maw of some long-dead beast. Jack led the way inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the water trembled. Briggs tensed. Jack turned, signaling for him to stay close. Then they saw it. The third map fragment lay at the altar, undisturbed. Jack swam toward it. He reached out, and the shadows moved. A figure emerged from the darkness. At first, it looked like another statue. Then its eyes opened. They weren't alone. Briggs grabbed Jack's arm. Something ancient was waking up. Jack snatched the map, and the temple shook violently. They turned. And the dead city came alive. Dark figures stirred in the ruins, their forms twisting, shifting. And far above, in the distant waters, the phantom ship was waiting. Jack and Briggs swam for their lives. But as they ascended, Jack felt something cold and clawed wrap around his ankle. A voice, not human, whispered in his mind. "You cannot escape the curse." Jack's lungs burned as he struggled. Briggs turned back, eyes wide in horror. Something was dragging Jack down. Jack's body was sinking fast, pulled down by an unseen force lurking in the depths of the sunken city. The ancient ruins loomed around him like a graveyard of forgotten gods, their hollow stone eyes watching as he struggled against the grip wrapped around his ankle. His lungs burned. Briggs hovered above, his eyes wide with terror. He hesitated for only a second before he grabbed his knife and dove straight down. Jack thrashed, desperate for air. He reached for his own blade, but the clawed hand tightened, dragging him deeper into the abyss. His vision blurred as shadowed figures shifted in the water, whispering, reaching, waiting. Briggs slashed downward, his blade slicing through something ice-cold and slick. A wail, ***, not of this world, ***, rippled through the ocean. The grip on Jack's ankle loosened. He kicked free. Briggs grabbed him by the arm and pulled him toward the surface. Their bodies shot upward, past the towering temple, past the silent stone guardians, toward the shimmering light of the world above. Jack's head broke the surface just as he felt the last of his breath escaping. He coughed, gasping, blinking against the blinding daylight. Briggs surfaced beside him, his own breathing ragged. "Never," he panted, "never let me dive into cursed ruins again." Jack coughed out seawater. "No promises." From the deck of the Black Serpent, the crew was shouting. Ropes were thrown down. Jack and Briggs grabbed hold as they were hauled back aboard. As soon as Jack's boots hit the deck, Briggs collapsed onto his back, arms spread wide. "I swear, the treasure at the end of this better be worth it." Jack ignored him. His shaking hands reached into his soaked vest and pulled out the third fragment of Captain Grimjaw's map. The crew gathered around, watching as he unrolled it beside the others. 3 pieces. Only 2 more to go. But before Jack could say anything, a crewman on the mast screamed, "The ghost ship! It's getting closer." Jack spun toward the horizon. The phantom vessel that had been following them was no longer lurking in the distance. It was almost upon them. The unnatural ship glided across the waves, its tattered sails billowing even in the still air. The whispers returned, curling through the air like fingers of mist. Briggs staggered to his feet, his face pale. "Jack, what do we do?" Jack clenched his jaw. They were running out of time. He stared at the map. The pieces they had glowed faintly, as if sensing the presence of the cursed ship. Then he noticed something. Each fragment contained tiny symbols, ones that hadn't been visible before. A realization struck him. The map is reacting. Briggs frowned. Reacting to what? Jack didn't answer. His mind raced. Grimjaw's map wasn't just a guide to treasure. It was part of the curse. Before he could speak, a voice echoed across the water. Low. Hollow. Inhuman. You should not have come this far. Jack's blood ran cold. The voice came from the Revenant. And as Jack stared at the phantom ship, a figure emerged from the shadows of its deck. A figure wearing a rotting tricorn hat. A figure whose empty eye sockets still burned with an unnatural glow. Captain Grimjaw. Jack barely had time to react before the phantom crew began to move. The undead swarmed forward, their bodies flickering between solid and spectral as they stepped onto the water itself. Jack drew his sword. Briggs groaned. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." The crew scrambled for their weapons, but Jack knew the truth. Steel would not kill ghosts. The only way to stop this was to finish what Grimjaw started. Jack turned to the crew. "We need to find the last 2 pieces, now." The next 2 days were a desperate race. Jack didn't sleep. He studied the map obsessively, using the new symbols to decode the locations of the last 2 fragments. The 4th was hidden on Dead Man's Reef, a place where the sea itself was cursed, dragging ships down into its graveyard. The 5th and final piece? Jack stared at the coordinates. They led to a place that didn't exist on any chart. A place that was nowhere and everywhere. The crew worked fast, pushing the Black Serpent to its limits. But the phantom ship followed. No matter how fast they sailed, no matter how they changed course, it was always behind them. Waiting. Watching. The whispers grew louder. The crew became restless. Some stopped sleeping, whispering to themselves in the dark. Others saw figures in the mist that weren't there. Jack knew they were running out of time. They reached Dead Man's Reef just before dusk. The graveyard of ships stretched before them, twisted wreckage jutting from the waves like skeletal remains. The air smelled of rot and salt. Jack, Briggs, and a few brave souls rowed out in a smaller boat. They navigated through the wreckage, searching. And then a wrecked galleon loomed before them, half buried in the reef. Its nameplate was still visible beneath the grime. The Devil's Gambit. Jack exhaled. That was Grimjaw's original ship. The 4th map piece was inside. Jack and Briggs climbed aboard, picking their way through the ruined deck. The galleon groaned under their weight, as if the bones of the ship still remembered its final battle. They made their way below deck. The air was thick with something old, something wrong. Jack stepped forward, brushing aside debris, and saw it. The 4th map fragment, half buried in the bones of a long-dead pirate. Jack reached for it, and the bones moved. The corpse reanimated, empty eye sockets fixing on Jack as it lunged. Briggs swore, swinging his cutlass as more skeletons stirred in the dark. The ship itself began to sink. Jack grabbed the map and ran. The undead clawed at them as they scrambled back to the boat. They barely made it as the Devil's Gambit vanished beneath the waves, taking its cursed crew with it. Jack didn't look back. He only unrolled the map, watching as the fourth piece connected with the others. One more to go. The final destination was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The coordinates led them to open ocean. No island. No land. Just endless water. Briggs frowned. This can't be right. Jack said nothing. And then the sea parted. A massive whirlpool formed beneath them, pulling them downward. Jack gritted his teeth. Hold on. The ship plunged into the abyss. They fell through darkness, water churning around them, until suddenly everything stopped. When Jack opened his eyes, they were no longer at sea. They were somewhere else. Somewhere between life and death. And before them, resting on a stone pedestal, the final piece of the map. But standing beside it, waiting, was Grimjaw. Not a phantom, not a ghost, but a man. Alive. Smiling. And he said, "You've finally made it, lad." Jack stared. Because Captain Grimjaw hadn't aged a day. Jack's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about treasure. This was something much, much worse. And Jack had walked straight into it.